How do you choose which industries you want to get into as an entrepreneur?
What I enjoy is influence the behavior of the masses. Not one is better than the other. There's much more importance than first mover advantage is that you're the last man standing. You need to convince investors that this is going to be big. When you start a company, the blueprint that is always the same.
When you have an idea, there are 4 or 5 people in the world who've had the same idea.
Start as early as possible. And particularly when you're still in school, too many people are afraid of doing something with their ideas.
That's a line I'm going to keep with me forever. Welcome to Rising Sharjah, where we dive into the stories of innovators and disruptors reshaping the business world. Today, we're joined by Christian Mischler, a serial entrepreneur with a wealth of experience in launching and scaling businesses across multiple sectors. Christian is currently leading Deskimo, a trailblazing startup transforming the concept of workspaces across Asia and the Middle East. Join us as we explore the journey of Deskimo and Christian's approach to entrepreneurship. Welcome to the show, Christian.
Thank you very much for having me.
Let's go to Deskimo. Can you tell us what is Deskimo and what core problem does it solve for a consumer in Sharjah?
Deskimo is an aggregator of professional workspaces. So we make co-working spaces such as WeWork, Regis, similar places available to users of the Deskimo app. So instead of having to have a subscription or a membership with any of these co-working spaces, you can basically just download the Deskimo app and then you can freely access any of these partners. Right now, we see a big trend of people working either from home or from in between the company office and somewhere from cafes. But often, it's not a very kind of professional environment for people to work from, but it's for calls or for meetings. And you just sometimes want to have access to a professional office without having to commute all the way to the corporate office. And so we basically provide people an option with near home office space aggregated through Deskimo.
Could you throw some light on how Deskimo operates and how does a customer gain value from it?
It's a two-sided marketplace. We're in between all of these co-working space operators, such as The Place, Unbox, WeWork, these type of brands that people might know. And we help basically these smaller operators, co-working spaces, to get access to a global audience of remote workers, hybrid workers, people that not necessarily would look for a co-working space themselves because they might work for a large company that has moved hybrid and now suddenly asks employees to work from home. And so maybe they don't have like a good home office setup, so they want to get access to a co-working space. On the supply side, we work with these operators, these co-working spaces. On the demand side, we have basically two customers. One is a company that has now a hybrid or a remote workforce, or maybe just some people that don't come to the office all the time. And so the company wants to give them the ability to work from a core and not having to contract tens of different workspaces themselves. The second audience that we have is the people that are freelancers, entrepreneurs, solopreneurs that work maybe for 3-4 months out of the Emirates and just want to get access to a workspace and don't want to buy a membership basically for a few months at these co-working spaces.
What I know about Deskimo is y'all are not just present in more than 30 locations within UAE, but you're also across Europe and other GCC regions. Can you tell us how does a business like Deskimo scale so fast? And also what are the challenges you face in global expansion?
Internationalizing a company always comes with challenges around time zones and currencies and languages and the localization. And Deskimo is not my first company that I've started in a similar type of fashion, a two-sided marketplace. And so I've learned in the past, what is important. And the two-sided marketplaces, it's always first about supply. So you need to have, enough, in our case, co-working spaces listed on the application in order to have a relevance then for somebody downloading the application and then seeing like what is actually listed on. And so we first, like when we enter a new country, we make sure that we support the currency, the time zone is there and it's localized to the language. Right now we don't have Arabic though, so we only have it in English here. And then we contract these co-working spaces. And once we have like 10 to 15 co-working spaces in one country, we put the country live and then start with business development, marketing, to get people to download the application, then explore and bring some initial traffic to these co-working spaces. And then, it's important with two-sided marketplace that you build both sides equally. So you need to continue to focus on supply, so add more workspace options, but then also continue to contract companies that then sign up with Deskimo and give a budget to their employees to access any of these workspaces. And then it's just like, it takes its own dynamic, right? It starts to grow and people talk about it and workspaces refer it to, their users and then it starts to build up. But it's always a challenge. Every new country is unique. The way that people work, the languages, the cultural aspect as well, with how employers deal with their employees, and more subtle kind of like differences. And just need to have interviews with like users and companies to really understand what are these subtle differences, so that they can address it also in your marketing strategy.
I think what comes out very clearly from your business model is partnerships plays a very vital role. Having the right partnerships with these co-working spaces and also with companies who can provide the Deskimo app to their employees to use these spaces. What has your rule book or your mantra been to attract the right partnerships? Because this is something a lot of us can learn from. Even for me personally, I'm interested to know, how do you identify and attract such partnerships?
So on the supply side, on the co-working space side, we only work with professionally operated workspaces. And these can be business centers, it can be co-working spaces. We don't work with cafes, kind of like venues that have a different purpose and they just want to have sort of like an alternative purpose. So for that, that's relatively easy, because you can find what are the professionally operated workspaces. On the demand side, it's more difficult, because it's basically an infinite supply of potential partners or companies that could sign up with Deskimo. And so there it's more to find which companies have remote employees. And so you can also go through kind of like the job offerings to see who's hiring for remote.
That's a very good idea.
It's kind of like you have to find kind of like your target persona almost. And what is sort of like, what are the attributes in a company that would benefit of Deskimo? And then how can I find these attributes in other ways? Whether it's hiring, whether it's kind of like their location setup, how many offices do they have, how big is their workforce, how many. You can also go through LinkedIn and see where are people located. And then once you've identified a target company, then basically just reach out to the decision maker. And LinkedIn obviously is great for that.
I know it's been 3 to 4 years now, but the pandemic really impacted the way people went back to work. Like for the longest time, all of us were working from home. And then some of us didn't really want to come back to the office. And that's when flexi desks and co-working spaces, like the industry boomed. Can you tell us where was Deskimo at the crux of this situation, and how did you monetize the pandemic or the time after the pandemic, or how did it impact your business?
We started in the pandemic. So, I've been working remotely since 2012, or the past 12 years, because, I had companies in Asia and Europe and like many offices in different countries. And to me, it was always like, if I go to an office, I can work with 5 or 10% of my staff, but I'm still going to be remote with like 90% of my staff. So why can't I be like 100% remote, right? So if I can work, 90% remote like staff, so I can also be 100% remote. But previously, in kind of like a previous life, I was working for Credit Suisse, in-house consulting. And there I was always kind of like, you're not coming to the office on a Friday, you probably have a long weekend. And so like you work from home was always like, okay, you're not actually working, right?
It's frowned upon.
It was frowned upon.
Yeah.
And then the pandemic completely changed this. Like everybody had to stay productive and everybody got enabled to actually work from home and had to have the physical infrastructure, like laptops and phones. If people still had like their desktop computers at the corporate office, they suddenly had laptops and were able with VPN to log into the company, environment and all of that. So suddenly the pandemic helped companies to make that move, enable their employees to work from home. And so, in the pandemic, with my co-founder, we were kind of like sitting down and like, what do we expect in terms of business opportunities to come out of the pandemic? And there were obviously, the short-term opportunities like selling face masks or sanitizers. We felt like everything around kind of like the future of work just massively accelerated in a way thanks to the pandemic, because, companies had to invest into these type of infrastructure. And so we wanted to build something that addresses now this newly arisen need, from companies and employees to address like this space of the future of work. And first was like, in places like Singapore, Hong Kong, where we also operate, there's a lot of home offices that are very small. People live in 2-bedroom apartments, they have 2 kids, like, both parents are working, you have to have Zoom calls and maybe you have a pet, and like, it's just like, you can't work like that, right? Yeah. And so we wanted to provide like near home office space, which in turned out to be great, because people after the pandemic, they realized, okay, now I have near home office space. I don't actually have to be, stuck in traffic for like an hour, from Sharjah to go to Dubai. I can actually just work from nearby my home in Sharjah, and I don't have to commute. And so even like as the pandemic subsided and people could go back to the office, I think employees are like they really start to like, the flexibility, the ability to work from like, different places and not having to go to the office.
Like I read recently, every shoulder tap that happens in office takes 27 minutes away from what you were initially working on. And I really need to rest my shoulders. So for me, days that I work from home, I feel I do nearly 3 to 4 times the amount of work that I could get done, because there are a lot of distractions in terms of, let's grab a coffee, let's take our lunch break together. Can you help me with this? While if you hadn't seen me, you would have found a way to do it yourself, right? So for me, like working out of a co-working space or having a flexi desk or just working from home, I think it just multiplies productivity exponentially.
On the one hand, you can get more done in the same number of hours, or you get the same amount done in a little less hours, and gives you flexibility to maybe run some errands or like, have a doctor's appointment or like, look after the kids, that you have to do, and still get like all like what you're supposed to do, you get it done and you reach your KPIs, even though like instead of wasting the time basically for like 2 hours in traffic, you use these 2 hours for something that adds more value to your life.
True. And you touched upon, real estate in Hong Kong and Singapore. I just want to know from you, maybe I don't have in-depth perspective on this, but which are the different markets that Deskimo is present in right now?
So right now we're the leading marketplace aggregator in Asia already. So we're headquartered in Singapore. We have a presence all across Southeast Asia, including Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam, Philippines, Hong Kong. We now, have a presence across the UAE as well. I think by now the second largest aggregator here in the UAE. We just opened Europe as well. So, we have first workspaces in Europe, and we're slowly expanding, so I'd say like to all sites from Singapore. So like we're opening Japan, we're looking at Australia, New Zealand, and we're going to expand more into Europe. And we realize also like the more locations, the more countries that we add, the more value it adds to all the existing users already. Because there's a lot of expats, working in Hong Kong, Singapore, Dubai, that are, from Europe. At some point we also expand to the US. And so, when they have a Deskimo account and they use it for their business trips or use it, in Singapore for like near home office space, they come to Dubai sometimes for like a business trip or like to stop over, and they still have the same office access as they're used to. And so it adds a lot of kind of like ride hailing, and you have Uber. And you can open Uber in Paris or you open it in New York. This access to a familiar environment.
Right.
Deskimo is kind of like your office in your pocket.
For a business that you started not more than 2 to 3 years ago, the growth is phenomenal. Which brings me to a question about your entrepreneurship journey. I know from knowing you prior to the podcast that this isn't the only business. You have your hands in a lot of different businesses. I want to pick your brain a little on how do you choose which industries or sectors you want to get into or invest in as an entrepreneur?
I think it's a very personal choice, what industry you're excited about. So Deskimo, I think, is my 12th or 13th company that I started. And I started early on. So like, I started when I was 16. And so I had a long time, to build companies. And so it started from like web design to publishing to food delivery and hotel booking. And so I started to realize that when you start a company, it's kind of like a blueprint that is always the same. So, no matter what kind of company you start, it's now these days about like a brand, like a domain that you need to find. A .com domain should be available, which is becoming harder and harder. You need to, find first employees. You need to create like a slide deck and financial model, and you need to hire like people and convince them that this is going to be big. And then you need to convince investors that this is going to be big. And so like these type of processes are all the same, no matter which industry you target. So I'd say like the skill or like, building a company remains the same no matter what industry. And then I think the industry that you choose should be something where you have kind of like a unfair advantage almost, like, something where you maybe have a better chance at winning than somebody. And in my case, I've built so many marketplaces from food delivery to hotel booking to vacation rental and now basically an aggregator marketplace that I feel like not more qualified, but I have made so many learnings in the past that I don't have to repeat the same mistakes again that I made in the past.
You've built like a mastery in the marketplace.
Yeah, exactly.
Taking forward what you said is you started, building businesses when you were 16. I personally want to know, what are the different ways you can start a business if you're not someone who is backed up with a lot of capital? What do you do in terms of like something like sweat equity, or say I want to start a business, but I don't have the funds to start one, but I have an amazing idea. What can people like me do?
Two paths that you can choose to start a business. And I think it's not one is better than the other. One, what I call kind of like a lifestyle business, which is something where you don't have to invest much to start, and it can be kind of like a service business. It can be something that you provide any type of service, and you basically get paid right away for delivering that service. Or it can be a product as well, right? So it can also be like you make scented candles at home, and you sell these products through an e-commerce store, and basically everything that you sell makes you money. In this path, you have to avoid the trap of only making money while you actually deliver the service. So if, for instance, if you're a yoga teacher, you're only making money while you teach yoga. And if you travel, go on holidays, you will not make any income because you're not there delivering the service. So an alternative approach to that would be that you actually create almost like an agency or like a talent pool of yoga teachers. And then you place these yoga teachers with yoga studios, and you contract, these yoga studios that need teachers, and you get freelance yoga teachers that maybe have a full-time job and just want to earn like sort of an extra income by teaching. But you as the yoga teacher talent agency, you will continue to make money when you travel, because like these teachers will go teach. And so that's kind of like what I call the lifestyle businesses that they will scale a little bit more slowly. They're maybe not they're not going to be a unicorn valuation, but it can become into like something decently big and can be a good sort of alternative to a corporate income. The alternative way, which I do more, is kind of like have a high growth tech venture where raise venture capital that invests into product development, and it's quite unprofitable at first, but then it can become really profitable after a few years. But it's an alternative path, and it's a little bit different. The high growth tech startups versus what I call the lifestyle venture, and one is not better or worse than the other. It's just in a way like a choice. What do you want to aspire? And I think for a lot of people that have currently corporate jobs, a lifestyle venture is a great alternative because it takes a lot less risk in a way, and you can start even on the side. You can do this on the weekends or in the evenings. You can get started and see if this works, and then if it works, you can give it your all and quit your corporate job and just see like where this takes you.
That's amazing. I think you've already sparked a lot of ideas in my mind itself, and I'm sure our audience will resonate with that thought. Coming to your core value, or is there like a thread of principles that you keep in mind irrespective of which business you get into, that no matter whether I'm into lifestyle, I'm into fintech, I'm into finance, I start my own hotel tomorrow, this is what I will keep in mind?
So the thing is, like, I have so many business ideas all the time. I keep a list on my phone with like sort of ideas of things that I feel like, I wonder if somebody has done this already. And then I Google a little bit and then don't find it and just put it to my list. And just as a parking lot. And like, if I'm kind of like, want to start the next business, I would revisit, this list. And sometimes I discover some of the business ideas, like, a few years later, that I realize, oh, somebody actually did it. And I had it on my list and also thought like, this would be a business idea. And then somebody did it. And I'm really happy, that somebody else also discovered kind of like this opportunity and went for it. For me personally, I need to be passionate about, in a way, the industry or the opportunity. Any business that I start, it should have the opportunity or like the ability to be a global player. So I don't want to have like what they call a local hero. So I'm not really interested in businesses that could be, it's an opportunity that would only exist in Sharjah or in the Emirates. Global opportunities, even though they're much harder because there's other people working on the same opportunity on the other side of the world. But it's just more fun because, you can, if it works out, you can scale this globally. And so, these are kind of like just where I want to dedicate my time. It's not really, a value in that sense. Like, what I enjoy is influence the behavior of the masses and like remove friction, from people's everyday lives. That's like kind of like all of my previous businesses are like along these lines, which is something that I, enjoy doing. And I see like, random people using my product, it gives me good feeling. And so that's what I enjoy doing.
You touched upon one point where you said you note down the ideas you have, and maybe a few weeks later or a few months later, you notice that the business has been launched by someone else. And I was told that at any point of time, when you have an idea, there are 4 or 5 people in the world who've had the same idea. But then someone goes ahead and does this. And like, in business, speed is very, very important. And that's what gives you the first mover's advantage. What do you do when this happens?
The thing is, like, when I put it onto my list, it's not something that I immediately want to go after. It's just like, because normally I'm I'm too busy already with like all of, the companies that I'm involved in. And so I just park it that, if some time frees up and I feel like, okay, now it's time to start the next business to revisit. And if then still nobody has done it, I would maybe go after one of these ideas. But it gives me a good feeling if someone, like I had the Uber idea, I think a lot of people did, but ultimately it's like, it's all about execution. Like ideas are worthless unless you actually do something about it. And there's a lot of also friends in my network, they're like, oh, I want to be an entrepreneur and I have this idea, but they're in their well-paid, corporate or the banking jobs and like they enjoy all the benefits that come with it and just don't do anything about it. And then it's like they complain that somebody else did it. And it's like, yeah, you didn't do anything about it. Like you should go after it. And so like, it's important that like, if you have an idea and you want to do it, go for it. What I think though is that first mover advantage is overrated. I think, the company before Deskimo is called Guest Ready and it's a vacation rental management company. We were, I think, the last to the party in Europe. Now, in the meantime, all our competitors, they went out of business, they much smaller, some of them we acquired. What is much more important than first mover advantage is that you're the last man standing. If you're the last business that is still there and is dominating the market, much better than the first mover advantage. And often you can learn, like a first mover, you make all the mistakes. If you come a little bit later, you see like all the things that you should not do, which is much faster, like a shortcut, to the right model. You can pitch basically, to the investors also like that you're going to avoid all of these mistakes. And then you might outcompete like the existing players in the market.
I think that's a line I'm going to keep with me forever. More than first mover's advantage, it's the last man standing. I think that's a brilliant line. I want to know how you find the right co-founder. What is it that you look at and how do you know that, yeah, we match?
To me, I've never been a solo entrepreneur. I always had co-founders. The reason for that is because building a startup, any company, it's hard. It's not only hard because it's an uphill battle until you have kind of like product market fit and it becomes sort of like, this machine that runs on its own. But to start a company, it takes everything of you, in terms of motivation, the ability to solve problems, to like deal with, people problems and like you have staff that is like, unhappy and like, and you can't pay them and you run out of money and you need to raise money. Like it's a constant struggle. And sometimes it will just be too much and you're like, ugh, I don't want to do this anymore. And you want to quit, right? As in every job, I guess, like, you have better and worse days. And if you have a co-founder, it's quite unlikely that you will have kind of like these negative moments at the same time. It can happen, but like it's less likely. And so, having a co-founder, it basically forces you to show up and forces you to kind of like, okay, we're going to push through and we're going to make this happen. So that's why, to me, I've never been a solo entrepreneur, always had co-founders. And so in terms of like finding the right co-founder, I think you just have to be honest to yourself in terms of what you're good at and what you can do, and what you're not so good at, and where there's people that are better in doing these things than how you could do it. And so to me, I was always like, okay, there's certain things that I'm passionate about, I enjoy doing, and I'm therefore also quite good at. It's kind of like a positive reinforcing cycle. And then there's other things that I'm just not that interested in, or I know that other people are much better. And so I looked for kind of like these qualifications first. It's like, okay, I need a CTO, for instance. I was a CTO once, but I know other people are much better at being a CTO. CFO, I studied banking and finance. I understand, how this works, but it's just not like, what I'm that passionate about. So I need a CTO, I need a CFO. And so I look for people that are really passionate about these aspects of business. And then, look into kind of like my network, which, is ever growing and increasing, thanks for this whole ecosystem that I'm part of. And try to find people that I like, that have this passion. If I need a CFO, okay, who's like really into accounting and finance and like, I had maybe CFO before and like, can't stop talking about like all the finance aspects of like, of business. And then, find somebody that I'm inspired by. And then, have a conversation with this person and basically pitch the idea to this person and say like, hey, have you ever thought of like, this idea or that? And try to, motivate that person to see like kind of like the vision that I have in mind and then maybe win that person as a co-founder. I think a lot of, entrepreneurs, that's when they start a business, they just do it with their sibling or the cousin or like the best friend from university because they like to hang out. And it's like, hey, we can hang out more if we start a business together, which I don't think it's a good idea because as soon as it comes to money, friendships are worth nothing anymore because, money breaks relationships, friendships. And you need to find people that you can work together. You should not be annoyed by that person, like, spending like 10 hours in the same office with that person. Don't get annoyed. The complementary skill set. You just have like two of yourself. And then, this is not adding value to the business and you want to build a business, right? So I think it's important to really have something complementary.
Yeah, because your friends are the people who are most like you, and that's why you're
That's right.
friends with them. So if you tend to partner with your friend, you're essentially just bringing two of you, and then what skills have you brought to the table?
Exactly right.
Which brings me to your journey. Can you tell me about any pivotal moves or strategic shifts you made that kind of accelerated your path to success?
I feel like I lived many different lives already, from like being an entrepreneur in high school to starting a company at university. But then after uni, joining Credit Suisse. I was in Credit Suisse in-house consulting, which was very corporate and very consulting life. It was interesting, but I wasn't passionate about what I was doing. Was like, particularly people were great, but the content I was not that passionate about. And then Rocket Internet, hiring me out of banking, moving me to Asia and start like a food delivery company. On hindsight, it feels like, okay, there's been like a red thread in a way, and like it kind of like all makes sense. But it's, I guess, like a hindsight bias. And I've been quite lucky also with getting to opportunities and capitalizing on these opportunities. I think what I maybe could have skipped is this, adventure into the corporate world, because I think it didn't really add that much to, kind of like my entrepreneurial life. I just did it because I'm interested in banking, in banking products at least. And I felt like if my startups fail, I can always go back to consulting or banking. It's kind of like a fallback option. It's almost like an insurance. Now, on hindsight, I wouldn't have needed that insurance. So I could have skipped, these few years in banking. You never know, right? If you would have taken a different path, maybe it would have, set you up differently and would be in a different place. So.
Christian, we've seen your LinkedIn, and it's like company after company listed there, and it's like accolades to your career, and it shows us how much you've grown. I think you would be an ideal candidate for potential entrepreneurs to know the top 3 things to keep in mind, or your 3 stars of entrepreneurship. What are the 3 things we should keep in mind when you want to start a business?
First, I think, as we talked about kind of like your co-founders, I think it's important to really know yourself and understand what is your skill set. What can you do better than others, and what are you really passionate about? And then with that, also find out what you're not passionate about and what you're not good at, because no one is great at everything. So find a co-founder. I'd say, like, if you're a first-time entrepreneur, it's probably easier to get started if you have a partner in crime. Somebody you can, bounce ideas and discuss, etc. And find somebody, for instance, if you want to create a podcasting agency, right? And you have, like, you're great in like videography, don't find another videographer. Find somebody who is great at audio maybe, or great at sales, because you need to pitch your product. So that's one thing. I think, have a complementary team to get started. Second, it's the passion. Are you really passionate about this? Do you really want to do this like 12 hours a day for like the next like 6-7 years, or like even longer? And is this that you want to, connect your name with, and people think of like your name that, oh, it's this industry? Like, that's not every industry is equal. And so I think it needs to be something where you feel like, okay, I have a strong skill set in a certain area, and I'm really passionate about it. I love this idea. I love this industry, and I want to like serve people in this industry. I think third, that's probably the most important one, is that you build a business in an expanding industry. And I think if you're at this point, for instance, create a CD rental place. There might be an opportunity because there's not much competition anymore, but there might be a reason why there's not that much competition. And the trend will be like people will use less and less CDs. If you have a physical bookstore, or if you're like a printing company, that focuses on book printing, these are all industries that are matured and are declining. However, if you build something where you see a macro trend, a trend that people go more asset light, they're more remote, hybrid, in terms of like working, it's the access economy now with AI, and like people use technology to solve new problems that previously they couldn't solve. These are vastly expanding industries. And if you build a company that is in this industry and you just manage to grow as fast as that industry, you're not even outcompeting anybody else, and still your business will grow. And so it's much easier to build a successful company in an expanding industry than one that retracts and compresses, because you will have to outcompete everybody to just like, at least survive. And so it's going to be a big struggle.
I think that's some great advice, which brings me to the last question of today's podcast. You said you started off when you were 16, your entrepreneurship journey. I want to take you back to the time you started your first business. What would the present day Christian tell the 16-year-old Christian?
What took you so long?
Yeah.
I think, 16 is great, but I should have started with 14. I think too many people are afraid of doing something with their ideas. And I tell so many people, start as early as possible. And particularly when you're still in school, this is the best time to start a company because you have nothing to lose. What's really the downside? You live at home, you go to school, if you're not dropping out of school because of your business, and you just have to wait anyways a few years until you finally graduate. This is the time to start your business. And, mostly, pupils, they have different ideas and they want to play football and whatnot. And that's all great. But if you want to make some money early on, maybe, you want to buy, I don't know, whatever you want to purchase when you're 14, 15. But if you want to have more sort of pocket money, start early. There's nothing to lose. Even if you kind of missed your teen years, starting your early 20s, when you're at university, you anyways have to wait until you graduate, from university. So, spend some time on building a lifestyle business. Not necessarily the high growth tech ventures, because that will probably require you to drop out of uni, drop out of high school. And then, there's a risk involved in that. But if you start a lifestyle business, if you start that yoga, talent pool, or, I started with a web design company. So together with one co-founder, we created websites and we sold them to companies. My second business was flashcards for students to prepare for their university exams, and was a great success. So that stuff is, you create a product or a service and you sell that. And as soon as you sell it, you have some income. And you learn so much from doing this in terms of sales, product development, pricing, how you sell this, how you build companies. That is invaluable. And you anyways have to wait until you finally graduate. So it's the best time to start it. And the earlier the better. And of course, you're afraid of the downside. You're afraid of when you're 16 to sell something to a 50-year-old CEO of a company. But that, gives you that confidence and hones your skills that will be invaluable later on as well. And whether it's then for job interviews or whether it's for presentations that you have to give at university, the earlier you can start, the better, because it will just shape your personality as well. And so, I think that advice would be take even more risk, do more, and don't be afraid. I think these are the things that I would recommend myself, looking back sort of 25 years.
I think that's incredibly inspirational, what you just said. And to our audiences who are hesitating from taking that first step, it's loud and clear. What are you waiting for? How much more time do you want to lose? So I think we could go on for hours. It's been an extremely enriching session. Thank you so much, Christian, for joining us today. And it was a pleasure